Good evening. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum and the 40th anniversary of the Institute of Politics. Boy, have we got a weekend planned for you. I'm Jean Shaheen. I'm the current director at the Institute of Politics. For the past 40 years, the Institute has worked to carry on President Kennedy's legacy of inspiring young people into lives in politics and public service. As the founders of the IOP envisioned, we do that by connecting students with real people who are practical politicians. We hope that this 40th anniversary celebration will serve not only to recognize the past achievements of the IOP, but also to rededicate the work of the Institute to our mission, which is described by former Harvard Dean McGeorge Bundy as follows: to enlist young Americans in the understanding and practice of democratic political life. Now, I'm happy tonight to have the honor to recognize some of the very special people who are associated with the IOP who are in the audience. First, I'd like to point out the IOP staff. We're extremely proud of our staff. I wonder if you would all just raise your hands, look around, and please join me in recognizing the IOP staff. They are dedicated, enthusiastic, and hardworking. Next, I would like to introduce the members of our Senior Advisory Board who are in the audience. First, of course, is our special guest, Senator Ted Kennedy. Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg. You're going to get to hear from her a little later, too. Secretary of Labor Elaine Chao. We're delighted that she's here. Senator John Culver, who chairs the board of the Institute of Politics. Secretary of State Trey Grayson. Secretary of State in Kentucky. I need to add that in, Trey. Congressman Phil Sharp. Milt Wertzman. And Heather Campion. Heather. Finally, I should recognize my predecessors at the Institute of Politics, Baroness Shirley Williams, who is here, Congressman Sharp, and Senator David Pryor. David. We begin tonight's event with a video that looks back at the history of the Institute of Politics.
At the start of every school year, I have a video clip that I show to all the students. In fact, I've started showing it to the faculty in our first faculty meeting, too.
I urge all of you today, especially those who are students, to act, to enter the lists of public service. The educated citizen has an obligation to serve the public. He may be a precinct worker or president. He may give his talents at the courthouse, the state house, the White House. He may be a civil servant or a senator, a candidate or a campaign worker, a winner or a loser. But he must be a participant and not a spectator.
The students after that clip will come to me sometimes with tears in their eyes and say, I just didn't know, or I'm so glad you did that. Now I know why we're at the Kennedy School.
We're here at the IOP as a memorial to President Kennedy. And one of the things President Kennedy said, one of my favorite lines, is where he talked about the importance of participating and the responsibility that the educated citizen have to be a participant in this government, to make democracy work.
Kennedy had a strong appeal to young people, and his whole ideal of public service, of government and politics. He brought young men and women into Washington as FDR had done 20 years before.
Merely establishing a library and museum in Franklin Roosevelt's tradition would not be sufficient.
There was no model for an institute of politics, a place that would try to excite people about elective politics and understand everything about elective politics. Initially, this was not very well received by most of Harvard. Most people said if we needed an institute of politics, we would already have one. Harvard's been successful for more than 300 years, so, what do we need something that we don't have for? Besides politics, what does that have to do on campus? It's a little dangerous.
You had people being drafted, and technically what it was not just the draft. Obviously there was a draft then, but a decision not to honor student deferments automatically. We got to the fall, that was a big issue, which is when McNamara was coming.
Having McNamara as the first in a series, I asked the dean of Harvard College whether I should expect trouble. And the dean, with a complacency that really tells much about the old Harvard, said, "No, there'll be no trouble. Harvard men do not riot." Well, he was wrong. So he got out of the car and engaged in an exchange with the students. He got off somehow, I've forgotten just how, and was spirited away through the steam tunnels. And his guide was my assistant, Barney Frank. When we got into the little yellow house, which was in the spring of '67, it proved to be the best strategic decision I ever made, because it was an ideal location for undergraduates. It was right smack in the middle of their undergraduate houses.
And I remember spending many afternoons there visiting with students and fellows. Some were former members of Congress, others had been administration officials, Republicans and Democrats, finding out from them what politics was really like from the inside.
In the early 70s, you couldn't help but be political. Everybody was political. You'd get tear gassed on the way to class. It was a crazy time at Harvard. The Vietnam protests were in full swing. Kent State.
We wanted to deal with current political problems and current policy problems and shed light on them and excite people about them.
One of the things that happens in most of our education institutions is that people spend lots of time in classrooms and reading books and listening to lectures. But there's another way in which we learn many valuable things, and that is through interacting with other people. Not simply those who agree with us or whose views are very similar to ours, but learn from those who have different priorities, different perspectives, and different points of view.
The spirit of civil discourse, and that's incredibly important in public life. I think the best leaders, like John Kennedy, knew when to stand and fight on principle and when to reach out and find common ground. And that's really politics and leadership at its best.
My experiences here as an undergraduate at Harvard, with roommates and with friends, with a college tutor like Alan Keyes, with a housemate like Grover Norquist, with my roommate who was president of the Harvard Republican Club, tested me, prepared me to then be assistant to President Bill Clinton. Very different perspectives, very different people. But that perspective is unique to Harvard.
One important lesson that I think I got from the IOP and from working with Ron Brown was not to shy away from the hard issues in life, the thorny issues. I really walked away wanting to grapple with with the issues that concern us all, but are the most intractable in some ways. And for me, that led to a career looking at civil rights and criminal justice.
What I found was the IOP provided just a constant source of fuel to the fire, and because there are so many opportunities at the IOP, so many ways to get involved.
Whether it's through our resident fellows or our visiting fellows, the people who come in from government service, from elected office, who lead study groups, or whether it's in the forum.
And it is the exciting place, not just for the Kennedy School, it's central to Kennedy School, not just for Harvard, not even just for Cambridge and Boston. It's a world-class institution.
And one of the things that we know is that young people who have met an elected official are about twice as likely to get engaged in political activities as those who haven't. I think that's what we do better than anything else. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Kennedy School of Government, David Elwood.
Thank you, Governor Shaheen, and welcome all of you. The governor's doing a terrific job, and we're enormously proud to have her follow in the footsteps of such remarkable predecessors here. You know, it really is 40 years ago that the Institute of Politics was launched to commemorate the life of John F. Kennedy. And in a 1966 letter to then President of Harvard, Nathan Pusey, Jackie Kennedy wrote, this was a letter, by the way, at the time, it wasn't quite clear whether the Kennedy Library would be located here or moved where it was. Said, "My husband's memorial ought to be a lively place, full of students and activity and thought about the future, not merely a place anchored in the past. It will be wonderful if Harvard can bring this about." Well, if she only knew. Every night, this place is hopping. Every night, there's something going on. And whether it's a debate for a gubernatorial debate, a head of state, or some controversial speaker offering different perspectives, this is the place to be. And the Institute of Politics, it's not just the forum, it's a major connection with lots of folks, especially the students, especially with politics. What's interesting is Graham is right. The Institute of Politics was a controversial idea. In some ways, it remains one. This is Harvard University. This is where we ought to think and reflect and have books. And what are we doing with this politics stuff? And by the way, now, when politics seems so mired in partisanship and the country seems struggling to find a way to find common ground and serve public service, the Institute of Politics isn't the problem. The Institute of Politics is the hope. It is the place that inspires extraordinary young people, idealistic young people, many of whom are here, to do the hard work, the difficult work, the sometimes painful work of serving the public. It's also a place that strives mightily to bring the world of ideas into the practical world of politics. And here, too, there's a remarkable array of things and activities getting involved. The fellows, which are part of both the inspiration and education of the students, but also are a way of connecting, again, the world of sometimes high-flying ideas with the practical world of everyday politics. This forum, which was very much built and renovated through the hard efforts of the Institute of Politics, Ed Schlossberg was deeply involved in its design and reconstruction. The John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum is a part of that. There's a TV studio where all of Harvard can connect again. It's part of the Institute of Politics. This year, we now have a video archive with 1,400 speakers. You might think that's all the speakers that ever spoke here. No, that's just since '78. So it's every night something exciting going on, something thought-provoking. We hear that many people end up coming to Harvard in part because of things they've seen or the activity that's happened here. And this all happens through the hard work of many of the people that Jean has already mentioned. But I want to pay particular homage to the Kennedy family. I think when this all began, everyone knew this was to be a memorial, or certainly something to honor the extraordinary legacy of John F. Kennedy. What I don't think anyone understood fully is what an exceptional interest and role and involvement that so many members of the Kennedy family would play. Led first and foremost, of course, by Senator Kennedy here, who will be speaking before us soon. But John F. Kennedy Jr. served as a board member for 16 years. Jackie Kennedy served for 15 years. And now Caroline Kennedy is deeply involved and active as a member of the board. So tonight, I want to just take a moment to introduce Caroline Kennedy Schlossberg. She is a Harvard and Columbia educated lawyer. She's been a woman who's been involved in society in all kinds of different ways and many different organizations. She's been the chief executive of the New York School System's Office of Strategic Partnerships, and she helped raise tens of millions of dollars to help remake the New York public schools. She currently serves as the president of the Kennedy Library Foundation and is honorary chairperson of the American Ballet Theater. One of the events that is certainly, I think, a favorite for many people in this room every year is the Profiles in Courage Awards. Caroline Kennedy was really one of the founders of that whole activity and takes enormous amount of energy and effort that recognizes courage in public officials. She's an accomplished writer on everything from editor of the Patriot's Handbook to Poems for Children. She's an impressive mother of 3 children as well, and in many ways, a gift to all of us. So with no further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Caroline Kennedy.
Thank you. Thanks. Good evening. Of all the memorials to my father, the IOP is the one that my family thought would best capture his spirit. A spirit of curiosity and hope, a belief in excellence, and a passionate commitment to making things more just, more prosperous, more peaceful, and even more fun. It was a spirit that was nurtured here at Harvard, and he took with him into the world of politics, and it's that same spirit that animates the IOP 40 years later. There are a lot of people here tonight who made that happen, and as we've heard, it wasn't always easy. I'd like to thank President Bach and the other presidents of Harvard who believed in the IOP, David Elwood and all the deans of the Kennedy School who have supported it or tolerated it, depending on who you talk to and when, and Jean Shaheen and all the former directors of the Institute who have defined the institution and preserved its founding energy, mission, and spirit for the past 40 years. I would also like to acknowledge the members of my family, my mother, my brother, my Uncle Bobby, and Steve, who set the Institute on its course, protected it as it grew, and insisted that it always be true to the memory of someone they loved. And dear friends like Arthur Schlesinger, Ken Galbraith, Dick Neustadt, and now John Culver, who has probably worked harder and longer than all of them put together. They did it for all the students here tonight and all of those who preceded you. They understood that students here at Harvard have more power than most to change the world, just as President Kennedy did, and they wanted to help you succeed in doing that. They put their bet on the undergraduates and hoped that as many as possible would gain an appreciation for politics by connecting with the people and ideas that animate the issues of the day and choose public service as a way of life. They were onto something for the Institute. Its fellows and forums, its surveys and programs have become the model, replicated at universities around this country, including institutes named after James Baker and Bob Dole. But there is no one here who better embodies the spirit or has worked harder to keep it alive than our next speaker. You all know who is coming next. But believe me, it isn't as easy as you would think to introduce Teddy in Massachusetts to roomfuls of people who already know him so well. His own service and leadership on every important issue of our time is a continuing inspiration and a gift to all of us, to this state, this university, and this country. And we are fortunate that he is here to articulate the mission for the next 40 years, as well as to embody the years that have passed. Before he gets up,
I just want to mention a couple of things that you may not fully realize. There is nothing he wouldn't do for this place. He has put his heart, his mind, and his friends into the IOP. No matter what else he is doing. And none of us fully understand how he can devote so much time and effort to every detail, every dollar, and every director of the IOP. For Teddy, it is all about the students. You have no more forceful advocate, no greater admirer, and no more understanding mentor. It is true for his nieces and nephews, his great-nieces and nephews, and for his extended family of IOP students. Finally, I would like to mention that since he joined the board of the IOP in 1970, the records show that he has missed only 3 meetings. So, I think that everyone in this room who has ever cut a class should give Teddy a round of applause.
Thank you, Caroline, so much. She's something else, isn't she? She certainly is. And I must say, I just know how proud her father and mother be of Caroline for all she's meant to our family and all she's done to carry on his legacy. I want to thank you all so much for the warm reception. Caroline and I are honored to join you this evening to celebrate this major milestone for the Institute of Politics. And it's gratifying to see so many here tonight who have helped make the Institute what it is today. The leaders of the Institute, current and former IOP fellows, past and present senior advisory committees, a very special friend of mine, John Culver, a classmate of mine years and years ago, warm friend Dave Pryor, others who are here in the advisory committee, Milton Gwurtzman, a class of mate of John's and mine going back in the 50s. And the student advisory committee as well that are here. We're grateful to all of you for all you've done over the years to make the IOP the true living memorial to President Kennedy. And I especially commend Jean Shaheen for the skill and the vigor and passion she brings to the IOP as its director, David Elwood for his stewardship of the Kennedy School. This anniversary is a well-deserved tribute to your leadership, and I know how much my brother would have appreciated it. I'd also like to acknowledge those who have worked on my staff in my office who are currently contributing to the IOP, Jim Flug, who served on my staff for many years, most recently as the chief counsel, is now here at the IOP as one of this year's 6 fellows. This semester, Jim is leading a study group on the Senate as a check on the president. After 217 years, is the Constitution still working? Well, I can tell you one thing, no one tried harder to make it work than Jim, and there might never have been a Watergate investigation without it. I also thank Sarah Bianchi, who served ably on my health policy staff. She worked for John Kerry and Vice President Al Gore as well. Sarah came back to the IOP recently to teach an undergraduate seminar on how to design a health care plan. She now serves on the Senior Advisory Committee. Also here is Cody Keenan, former member of my Health and Education Pensions Committee. Greg Dapdillian, who served as a fellow in my Senate Foreign Policy. Lisa King and Quinley Lynn, 2 Harvard College students, recently finished a summer interning in our committee's office where they worked in education and other issues and contributed mightily. Most of all, however, I'd like to recognize all of the students who are here, whether you're participants in the IOP's programs or just occasional visitors to forums like this one tonight, because you are why this institute was founded. 40 years ago, when Robert Kennedy and Harvard President Nathan Pusey signed the charter to create the IOP, their goal was not just to create a living memorial to President Kennedy. They wanted to fulfill one of Jack's highest goals, to bring the world of ideas and the students who live in it, closer to the world of politics. As Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said a century ago, explaining his lifelong passion for the law, through our great good fortune, in our youth, our hearts were touched with fire. Bobby and I knew that when Jack was a student here at Harvard, something had sparked that flame within him, and we hoped that the IOP would do the same for succeeding generations of undergraduates. We wanted this institute to inspire young men and women, not just to public service, but to real and active involvement in the life of our communities, our nation, and our time. We hope that by engaging students in major policy issues and exposing you to the world of politics, the Institute would motivate you to see politics as it should be and to make it that way. President Kennedy loved to tell the story of the famous Gallup poll of his day, which found that parents wanted their children to be president as long as they didn't have to be involved in politics. It was a line that always got a laugh, but to Jack it was hardly a laughing matter. He loved and lived by the famous words of John Buchan in Pilgrim's Progress, that public life is the crown of a career, and a young person, it is the worthiest ambition. Politics is still the greatest and most honorable adventure. Tonight, as we celebrate the work of this institute and reflect on Jack's legacy, I'm here to tell you that those words are still true today. They're true despite the partisan wrangling that taints political discourse, especially during this election season. They're true despite the pronouncements of media pundits who all too often reduce our debates to opposing sound bites. They're true despite the demagoguery of some in Washington and on the campaign trail who are quick to adopt the rhetoric of us versus them, when the realities of the issues we're dealing with are far more complex. Yes, politics is still the greatest and most honorable adventure. And as long as you carry within you the faith that those words are true, they'll remain true, no matter how that faith is challenged by day-to-day events. Today, our faith in America's political institutions is being seriously challenged. In fact, we're witnessing one of the greatest erosions of political institutions in our nation's history. At its best, politics is about community and the kind of society and nation and world we want to live in. In our history, that principle of community is as old as the Mayflower that brought the Pilgrims from England to our shores nearly 400 years ago. Even before they landed at Plymouth that winter day in December of 1620, they drew up an extraordinary agreement, the Mayflower Compact, to provide for governing the colony by the will of the majority. A century and a half later, after our independence was won, delegates from all the quarreling colonies were able to come together, and in their incredible wisdom, they were able to establish a new American community for the ages. The Constitution they created to guide that community was politics at its all-time best, and it made possible the immense achievements of our history ever since. They understood that power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. To restrain it and protect America from tyranny, they established the separate executive, legislative, and judicial branches. But that creation is under threat today. The administration in power has increasingly asserted a right to act in secrecy and to ignore laws passed by Congress. The Republican leadership in Congress willingly acts as a rubber stamp, disciplining party members to vote its way, reject contrary views, and even limit open discussion. All too often, Congress is willing to capitulate to the demands of the president, even if it means violating long-standing congressional rules, traditions, and basic constitutional responsibilities. With the exception of the recent Hamdan decision, in which the Supreme Court struck down the military commissions established by President Bush for trials of suspected members of al-Qaeda, our courts have not yet stepped up to the challenges posed by these excessive claims of presidential power. The administration is bent on keeping it that way, constantly pressuring the Senate to stack the court with judges who will look the other way. The result is a federal system that is dangerously unbalanced. If we care about the future of our country, we must revitalize the framers' vision of three co-equal branches of government that respect and check one another. Some argue that these are new and dangerous times, that the end justifies the means, that the shift in the balance of power among our political institutions is necessary for a commander-in-chief to keep the nation safe from the threat of global terrorism. But the nation has faced dangerous times before, and often it was the system of checks and balances that enabled us to get through those times. Consider the challenges our nation faced 40 years ago when the Institute of Politics was founded. The challenges were enormous and at times seemed insurmountable. The Cold War raged. The Vietnam War was escalating. Millions took to the streets and protest. Millions took to the streets in protest. Leaders were murdered. Cities burned. Young men and women gave their lives daring to call for civil rights. But through it all, our institutions did their jobs. And because of that, our country was able to find the way forward, even in the midst of immense policy challenges abroad and dramatic social upheavals here at home. We did not have leaders then who insisted on usurping authority, governing in secret in order to achieve their objectives. Instead, we had leaders in both the White House and Congress who were able to govern from a position of power with the authority they had, and who challenged us to be better and a fairer nation, even in the midst of troubling times. Their politics were the politics of hope, not the politics of fear. And the result was a better and fairer America. It was the politics of hope that enabled us to transform the strife that gripped our nation over race, enabled us to enact the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, two cornerstones of President Kennedy's agenda that were realized under President Johnson. It was the politics of hope that enabled us to achieve another of President Kennedy's goals, the landmark immigration legislation in 1965 that reinstated the heritage of the United States as a nation of immigrants made stronger by their presence. That single law eliminated the notorious Asian Pacific Triangle and the ugly quotas, national origin quota system, that allowed only a handful of Asians and those from the Mediterranean basin to enter the country each year. The enormous contribution of Asian immigrants since then has proved again that the United States is stronger, not weaker, because of our diversity. The politics of hope enabled us to lower the voting age to 18 in 1970, so that young men and women like yourselves could be more active in the political life of our community. We realized if they were old enough to fight in Vietnam, they were old enough to vote on issues of war and peace and other challenges and help to change our country for the better. The politics of hope enabled us to enact the Medicare and Medicaid, guaranteeing good health care for our senior citizens and for those that live in poverty. Throughout history, respect for the elderly and those in need has been the hallmark of every great nation. And by enacting Medicare and Medicaid, we were saying that the care of the elderly and the needy reflect our basic values. To be sure, many of these battles were brutal and hard fought. But through it all, we followed basic guidelines. respect for our community and its institutions and our founding principles, respect for each other, and a vision of politics and public service as a way to bring out the very best of our people, not the very worst. As a result, we continued the drumbeat for equality and opportunity, and we made unprecedented progress towards an America where government is, in fact, of the people, by the people, and for the people, where politics is about common community and our shared humanity, and where every citizen has a fair opportunity to achieve the American dream. By contrast, the politics of fear so prevalent today is exactly the opposite. It thumbs its nose at our institutions and their place in our constitutional structure. It caters to the worst instincts of our people and seeks to tear others down. Most troubling, it undermines respect for our ideals and way of life, the most powerful source of our influence as a nation. Compare, for example, the current debate over immigration to the debate 40 years ago. Instead of starting from a vision that views immigrants as an overwhelming positive for our country, indeed as the people who literally built our nation and made it great, the politics of fear today has allowed the bigoted, xenophobic attitudes of some to occupy an unworthy place in our discourse. This year, many of us have worked hard to develop a compromise that would secure our borders, open the door of America to adequate numbers of those who wish to enter, create a strict but fair pathway to citizenship for the many who are now here illegally but who play by the rules in every other way. And despite our best efforts, there are many in Congress who believe that the only solution is to build an 850-mile-long fence along our nation's southwestern border. The Senate already voted to approve a 370-mile fence, exactly what Secretary Chertoff said he needed for targeted urban areas. Yet there are those who want to build even higher, longer fences, and they want to round up and deport all those who are here illegally, without regard for their contributions to our society and our economy. By and large, those who put forward these ideas in Congress are practitioners of the politics of fear. They are less concerned with border security than with the security of their own seats in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Consider the politics of fear has shaped the priorities of this Republican Congress. This year, we spent precious time debating proposals to amend the Constitution, to ban flag burning and gay marriage. Two proposals that Republicans knew would never pass. But their goal was not to enact them. Their aim was simply to stoke the fear and anger of those who oppose these ideas and use that fear and anger to score cheap political points. Or consider the actions of the administration in the war against terrorism. The government has indefinitely detained hundreds of individuals thought to be linked to al-Qaeda. Many are people against whom the government has brought no charges, presented no evidence, and who have no recourse to justice in any form. Others have been detained overseas in secret CIA prison, which only recently have come to light. They've been subjected to interrogation techniques that all of us would describe as torture. Some of our leaders even argue that the Geneva Conventions, which have guided the rules of war for many years, are irrelevant in this new age and no longer needed to be followed. Just yesterday, Congress passed and sent to the President new legislation that'll strip detainees in the war on terror of their rights to challenge their detention in court. That legislation will also subject detainees to trials before military commissioners that simply do not comport with our long-held notions of fundamental fairness. Such policies are a far cry from the values of our leaders embraced when IOP was founded in 1966. That year, the Supreme Court issued its landmark decision that those accused of a crime must at least be informed of their basic due process rights, a fundamental principle of the American legal system. But under the politics of fear, even fundamental principles are called into question for political advantage. And when the politics of fear are combined with the erosion of our political institutions so central to our system of checks and balances, the result is what we are now enduring with the war in Iraq. For more than 3 years, we were told that the war is making Americans safer. Despite the fact that no weapons of mass destruction were discovered, despite the lack of any serious link between Iraq and the attack on our country on September 11th, despite the fact that Osama bin Laden was still at large, we were constantly told the war in Iraq was somehow achieving progress in the battle against global terrorism. Now we know from the recently disclosed National Intelligence Estimate last April that all 16 agencies in our intelligence community had concluded just the opposite. Just the opposite. Instead of lessening the threat of terrorism, our actions in Iraq have made the war on terrorism even more difficult to win. Perhaps if the Republican Congress had not acquiesced in the president's demand for unprobing acceptance of his agenda, we would not find ourselves in this place. Perhaps if our institutions had done their jobs as they did in prior times of strife, we could have avoided going down this path of greater peril. Given all that I have just said, you may wonder why I believe that politics is still the greatest and most honorable adventure and the worthiest ambition. Despite all of these examples, I still believe in the politics of hope. Throughout our history, when leaders have provided hope and have unified the country in common vision, Americans have risen to the challenge. That is still part of the American spirit today. Even as we struggle with these constant challenges to our constitutional system and our ideals, there are still times when we in the political arena are able to step up to the plate, try our best, and get something right. For example, we managed to renew and even improve some of the landmark civil rights laws passed this year that are equal or even better than the ones passed in the halcyon days 4 decades ago. This year, the Congress renewed the Voting Rights Act and managed to ensure that it remains as strong as ever. Despite the arguments of some that protections necessary to guarantee the right to vote a generation ago are no longer needed today. In '66 was the first full year under the elementary secondary education, which marked the federal government's first major initiative in that aspect of education and the first major efforts by Congress to correct the vast injustices in the public schools, especially those that serve low-income and minority students. We expanded those efforts in a rare act of bipartisanship with the No Child Left Behind, using ideas developed here in Massachusetts and other states to create a way for all schools to be held accountable and for the education of all students. That act has been seriously and grossly underfunded since its passage, but its principles are right. And when it comes to renewal, I'll continue to fight for adequate funding so that the noble goals can be realized for students. 1966 also saw the establishment of the National Organization for Women. Few would argue that our goal of equality for women in our society has been achieved, but fewer still would argue that we haven't come a long way forward in the 40 years that have passed since then. So it's evident that despite the setbacks of recent years, the ideas of politics as a noble and honorable calling remain strong. And it's stronger because of those challenges. One thing I've learned in public service is that the toughest issues of our day are seldom resolved in weeks or months or even years. You have to work at them. You have to persist. You have to build and maintain relationships not only with those whom you agree, but with those who come from opposite sides of the political spectrum. And you have to be unafraid to fail. You must have the resolve to continue for as long as necessary. That's where all of you come in. This anniversary is not only a time to honor this magnificent institute and celebrate its accomplishments, it's also a call to the IOP and to each of you to make the commitment that will carry our nation forward in the future, whatever the troubles of the times. You'll be amazed at the difference you can make, the mountains that you can move. As Archimedes said in ancient Greece, give me a lever and a place to stand, and I can move the world. The Institute of Politics has given you the lever, and the rest is up to you. As Robert Kennedy said in addressing the students at the University of Cape Town in 1966, each time a person stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. I look forward to the ripples of hope that all of you will send out in the future. As the IOP marks 40 years of inspiration in the events tonight and over the weekend, let us also renew its mission for the coming years. At a time when our nation faces the complex challenges of the war in Iraq, the global war on terrorism, seeks a greater understanding of other cultures, let us celebrate the IOP's great service as a forum for world leaders to speak their views and as a space for students and citizens to respond. At a time when the United States finds its economic position challenged by the rapidly evolving forces of globalization, let us reaffirm the Institute's commitment to performing the sound research and solid work on which good policy is founded. As bitter debates and narrow partisanship mar our political discourse, let us reemphasize the IOP's extraordinary role of engaging students in debate for the purpose of coming together for the common good. Let us never forget President Kennedy's words that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. Make that your guiding star. In doing so, you will continue to ensure that this institute continues to be a remarkable, living tribute to his legacy and to John Buchan's famous words. I commend these principles and this mission to each of you. I welcome the great work you will do in times ahead as you put the valuable experiences you've gained at this Institute of Politics into practice in the service of our nation. In doing so, may you make the next 40 years of the IOP even greater than the first. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy, for keeping with the IOP tradition and challenging us to think. Now I'd like to bring to the stage a journalist who is known to all of us in this room for her work on CNN, on PBS, and ABC. Judy Woodruff has covered the news and politics for over 3 decades. She joined us tonight to interview Senator Kennedy in a very special interview, and then to moderate a question and answer session with all of the audience. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Judy Woodruff.
Thank you, Governor Shaheen. I just want to say very quickly, first of all, I was honored to be asked to to participate in this program. I was in high school when John Kennedy was elected president, and I, like thousands and thousands and thousands of other young people, were inspired to go into some aspect of public service as a result of that. I chose journalism ultimately, but it was clearly your brother, Senator, who was had an enormous effect on my life. The other quick point I would make is that this semester I happen to be teaching a weekly seminar at another Institute of Politics, the Sanford Institute at Duke University. It's an outstanding place, but I want to say that like all the other places that do this kind of work, we all look to the example set by this Institute of Politics as the place that sets the bar high. So a commendation from my perspective. Senator, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, and we do have limited time, but I want to start out with something that you just said. At one point you said the media has focused on, I think you said, sound bites back and forth, the negative of politics, and then you went on to deliver a fairly blistering attack on this administration and Republicans because you disagree with them very strongly on their policies. My question to you is, many Americans look at Washington right now and they see that political divide that you just described. And I guess my question is, how do you give the American people hope that there can be a resolution when the two sides are coming at each other with these fierce arguments like the one that you presented tonight? We're hearing fierce arguments from the president and others on the other side. How do the American people ever see the two coming together, whether it's Iraq or anything else?
Well, I think you identified correctly the climate and the tension that exists in the nation's capital on these major policy issues. And the obvious question is, how is this going to alter or change? How are you going to really be able to deal with the major challenges that we're facing here at home and across the world? I think the first benchmark is really going to be the election this fall. I feel strongly about the candidates and the outcome, obviously, but I think what is really on the ballot is the politics of fear versus the politics of hope. And I think the politics of fear, as I see it, all started with 9/11, which is the tragic moment for our country and our society. But this is where it all has started, and it has to end. It has to end, my friends, because I don't believe that as long as we're going to have a continuation to appeal to the darker sides of people's emotions and feelings, that we're going to be able to get the extension of people willing to take the political kinds of risks to move ahead in terms of dealing with the challenges that we faced all during the now and have in the past. When we had, if you look back in the history of the civil rights movement, which is really the overarching, I think, challenge that this country is. We wrote slavery into the Constitution. We fought a civil war. That didn't resolve it. And then we had a situation where we had a Dr. King that created a climate and an atmosphere in the late 1970s. And then when a new generation of leadership came in the 1960s, people that had fought in the war, Republicans and Democrats, but primarily the Democrats, if you look over the history of these debates, said, well, we're going to contain the communism around the world. We're going to do something on nuclear arms control. That was part. What do we do back home? What's the toughest issue? When it was the issue of race. Toughest issue. But you had the coming together in the Congress. I mean, you had John Sherman Cooper that came together, and you had a Jack Javits that came in, a Cliff Case that came in, and Chuck Percy that came in. You can name the senators, Republicans and Democrats. They came in together. It was a common purpose and a common good. There were emotional arguments, 10 months of filibuster on the 64 Civil Rights Act until finally Everett Dirksen gave the word that they were going to make the compromise on the public accommodations on it, and it went on ahead. But that is where you had coming together on the Americans with Disability Act. Bob Dole was very involved with that, Tom Harkin and myself. We had Republicans and Democrats that worked together. Let me give you just an example of what I mean. If you just give you too long an answer, I'll show it in the name. Several years ago, when Bob Dole was the majority leader in the United States Senate, we had a bill up that dealt with national parks. And Senator Murkowski was the chairman of the committee. And I wanted to get New Bedford made a national park for the obvious historic reasons. Melville, you know it, the reasons, the fishing industry, it's a very historic and important place. So at the same time, I was interested in getting an increase in the minimum wage. And Murkowski said, if you don't offer the amendment on the increase in the minimum wage, I will put New Bedford in. And I said, no, I'm going to offer the minimum wage. I offered the minimum wage. We didn't carry it. They passed the bill without New Bedford in it, and Murkowski came over to me and said, don't consider this to be partisan because I left out one of Bob Dole's parks too. And I said, what good does that do me? I mean, so he said, well, I just want you to know it. So the Senate ended, and I saw Bob Dole sitting down there, and I was cleaning out my desk, and Tom Dasher was down there, and I went up to Bob Dole, and I said, what about another parks bill? And he said, what are you thinking about? And I said, yours and mine. He said, can you clear it on your side? I talked to Tom Daschle. Tom Daschle knew that I'd lost my park because I'd offered the minimum wage. He says it's cleared now. Dole said, I've just cleared it for the Republicans. It passed. Now listen, it goes to the conference, and the conferees say, okay, we'll take Dole's bill, but we're not taking Kennedy's. And Dole said, oh no, we came together, we're leaving together. Now that's what life used to be like in the United States. Very small, it's a microcosm. But it reflects the macrocosm in the ability. I differed with Bob Dole on many, many different issues. But we were able to work on ADA. That's non-existent today. That spirit, that willingness to reach out and reach across because of the harshness of this kind of gotcha debate.
Senator, if the Democrats were to take control, a lot of the pundits are saying the Democrats are going to take control of the House. They have a shot at the Senate, less likely, but it's possible. If the Democrats were to take control of one or both houses, do you think you would see the sort of reaching out, the sort of bipartisanship that you say was once there?
I think so.
Because we hear from some Democrats that there'd be investigations, that there would be recrimination.
You hear most of it from Republicans saying that that's what the Democrats are going to try and do. But and this obviously, when you look at the number of subpoenas, for example, they had 1,300 subpoenas, and the last time when the Democrats were in charge, they've had 3 in the House of Representatives investigating all of these problems. We just don't have oversight in the United States Congress. It just doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. I mean, those are one of the institutional aspects that I referred to. This is what you could do in the United States Senate. First of all, now in the United States Senate, you have the acting president. Now it's always a Republican. Never used to be that way. The rules of the Senate say the first person on their feet should be recognized. The advantage of that is they get the right to offer an amendment. You can come back in on second degree it if you want to, but it's still a very important advantage. That's the way it's been for 217 years. Now we're in the United States Senate, we have Republicans in. So you stand up and somebody else drifts on in there, they'll recognize the other person, not where you go. That's where you start off. There are 100 different incidents like that you could do in terms of repairing the kinds of ruptures that I've seen over the period of time. Al Simpson and I differed on immigration. Al Simpson said, you're not going to get your immigration bill through. It's plain and simple that. I said, well, what are we going to do? He said, you got the Democrats, you control the Senate. The Democrats control the House. You're going to run Al Simpson out. Imagine running Al Simpson out of the town. He said, so we're going to pre-conference it. So we sat down and we pre-conferenced it. Worked out all the details. They passed the bill and the conference report within 30 seconds of each other because people were willing to do it. People were willing to do it. People know how to do it. But when you have absolutely not the idea that you're going to try and sort of work, try and accommodate, difficult enough to try and do it. There's all kinds of ways that and everyone knows how to do it. The question is, do you have a leadership question? Do they get more are they going to do better on the polls by beating the hell out of the immigrants on this issue of the fence? Or are they really going to try and take some very tough and difficult votes to try and do something which is important in the nation? Until you get that change in atmosphere, it comes back again to fear or hope. That is going to be, the people are going to make a judgment decision. And just listen to your candidates and see which ones are doing it. And hopefully it'll begin to change.
I just want to ask one other follow-up on this and then move on to something else. But are you laying all the responsibility for this at the feet of the Republican administration, the Republican leadership, or does it do Democrats share some of the blame?
Well, I mean, I'm sure I can know instances where Democrats hesitated and halted rather than moving forward. I mean, I can remember the first time we had the immigration bill, and we saw the difference between what happened here in Massachusetts with Governor Romney and Sal DeMacy and Travellini and others. I was interested in this on the health plan. Everybody sort of held hands and jumped together on this, and it still has a ways to go. But that was really the politics of hope. I think Romney had to consider what's this do to his national ambition when he's on out there saying he worked with the Democrats and liberals up there in Massachusetts on this program. They're going to have to think. Others are going to have to think. But everyone held their hand. We came to the Senate. We said, well, the Democrats said, look, if we go ahead on this part that goes to a conference and it comes back, how are we going to hold the Republicans? So the Hispanics will get, will know who's to blame. The Republicans were thinking, how are we going to blame the Democrats so the Hispanics will go for us? Hispanics aren't going anyplace. They've seen exactly what's happened, and neither party has done very well with the issue on this part. But leadership has hesitated. I wish we had seen a filibuster of this, the bill of the detainees this week. I think we let an important opportunity go by. I think many of us that isn't so much the Democrats or Republicans. I suppose it's a lot in the eyes of the beholder. I think there's probably instances, certainly where the Democrats have held it up.
Senator, I want to ask you, I was asked to talk to you also about your career in the Senate, 44 years. You've talked about one important way the Senate changed, at least it sounds like you're saying things are different when it comes to the two parties working together. I mean, I will say that when I talk to Republicans, they say, well, when the Democrats were in charge, they didn't want to hear from us. That's what they say. But my question to you is, were there other senators, were there others in the Congress who you particularly looked up to when you came to Washington as a young man? You were, what, 30 years old when you first came to the United States Senate?
Well, there were. You couldn't even get in line to offer amendments. Everyone was so eager to try and get things going in areas of education. That was where it was all happening. You remember we were debating then about the higher education. It came out in 1960. President Kennedy said anyone that can gain entrance into school or college ought to be able to go there. They ought to be able to put together the package with grants and loans to do this. How were we going to do it? Was it going to go to the individual? Whether it's going to go to the institution? I mean, that whole place was just a fire with it. And we rarely got back up here to Massachusetts till well after my children had gone to bed on Friday night. We always went back Sunday night, and we're there at 9:30 in the morning. We're not ever in the United States Senate. We're lucky if we're in there 2 days. Work is being done by staff. You don't stay in there, and you're not around there. You're not going to be able to make the case on it. So there's a process, and I'm not answering in a procedure which reflect on it. But it was such a different climate and atmosphere about. President Nixon went out and made the speech out to the elderly people about the food. He was going to ask for food assistance for our elderly, and I mentioned that to Chuck Percy. He said, "Let's go over and offer an amendment." $100 million for begin the Meals on Wheels. Went over there and got an acceptance and went on through. Not that all the spending was the answer to everything, but it is such a climate and an atmosphere where you're able to get things moving, and that is what we have to get a return to.
So any one particular.
Well, I remember, of course, I'll give you an interesting story about one John Sherman Cooper, who was a great friend of President Kennedy's, Republican from Secretary Chow's husband, Mitch McConnell, worked with him and for him many, many years. Got his start in politics, but he was really a giant. Now listen, he comes in to the Senate one day, and they're just about to call the roll, and they call the roll, and he votes aye, and the ayes have it 55-45. And he said, I've just been reading the report here, and I'm not sure I've cast the right vote. So I'm wondering if the Senate would withhold asking for reconsideration, and I'll go back and read through the record tonight and read all of this, and then I'd like to ask the Senate to vote again tomorrow at 11 o'clock if it's not too inconvenient. Does anybody object? No objection. You even started mumbling that today, you'd be laughed out of that place. But the point about it is the extraordinary integrity that John Cooper had radiated through that place. There's several in the Senate that have it now, but that was much more the Phil Hart, another giant, but there were a number of those that have been recognized historically.
Who has it now? You said a few.
Well, I don't. No, that kind of thing. Let's get the next question. And
Okay. Presidents, you've served with 8 of them, in addition to your brother. What? Give us some of the highlights, the lowlights. I mean, who were some who were difficult to work with? Who were easy to work with? We already know what you think about this administration.
But
look back
this
for a
is
moment.
over now. Well, it's obviously with presidents. I had some difficulty with President Carter, as we know. You got to know that.
Let's see. I think you ran against him, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
But President Clinton, if you were able to demonstrate that you had bipartisan support and you were able to show, I mean, he's interested in everything, but he had his interest, he had special interest in just about everything too. But if you were able to show that you had bipartisan support and able to have 60 votes on it, you went to the top of the list on that. I mean, I can think Patients' Bill of Rights, for example. Once we were able to get 60 votes, it was #1 on his program. And that's fair enough. You go and do the work, you work with his people, you're able to do that. The president's got a lot on his plate, you get something else that he thought was very important. I found that he was both engaged and involved, recent, and we had a very good working relationship. And President Ford, you look at the FISA Act, you look today at how this administration dealt with wiretapping in the wake of Watergate, the whole series of wiretaps that they had during, just before that period of time. President Ford had Attorney General Levy, and he asked to come down to the Justice Department 4 different times. He had invited members of the judiciary to come down to work out what they call the FISA Act. That is the Wiretap Act. You have to get a court order in order to wiretap. And there's a process that's set up for that. And there's special provisions in terms of the Soviet Union. Everybody knew we had top secret things going in, included in there. Everybody was briefed in that. None of it ever leaked out. And that had worked incredibly, incredibly well. There was, in 1976, I introduced legislation passed when I was chairman of the judiciary, passed in 1978, 1 vote in opposition to it. You had civilian judicial oversight, someone else taking a look at the exercise of presidential power, what our founding fathers were talking about at that. President Ford, that is what he wanted. That is, you look back in the memorandum, he wanted that. That is what Levy wanted. When we started this other wiretapping, we said to the administration and Attorney General Gonzalez, why don't we do it the old-fashioned way, the way that we did it with President Ford? This is the way they did it at that particular time. Absolutely no chance. They want the issue. They want the wiretap issue to show people are soft in terms of dealing with the terror issue. That's the contrast on it. So President Ford was out there. I worked with first President Bush on the Americans with Disability. You know, I find that most of them were you could work with on. They had some interest in these.
Senator, any votes you've cast that you now regret?
Sure, yeah. You think I'm going to tell on election year? You're going to tell out there? No, I missed it. Judge Souter, I voted against. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. And you always have thought about, there was always the heavy presumption when I first came to the Judiciary Committee. We always gave to those that were coming on up for be nominees, I always gave them the questions. It was never looked at as a way of, we wanted to really know what people were thinking. And it's always similar kinds of issues on civil rights and voting rights and First Amendment issues and separation of church and state and other kinds of issues I've been long interested in. And But I made up my mind after we had gone through several that what we find out is that the Justice Department, this is what's happening, they have training films to how to answer the questions of Roe, for example, on the Roe v. Wade. They'll show how Bork got in trouble and how others, Justice Kennedy answered the questions and got by it. So this is no longer advice and consent in the way that the American people think. This is a game. This is a game of gotcha on this kind of a part. You've got to try and get to answer the question. They know just how to answer it. They're practicing, and they run through those drills on it. This is completely different. And what happened is I will not vote for a person for the Supreme Court unless they demonstrate an affirmative commitment to constitutional rights and liberties. I'm not going to take any more chances. I haven't, certainly with Alito or Roberts, and you look back, any of those who look at, you look at the record on both Alito and Roberts, and then look at their answers during the Judiciary Committee, and then look at their decisions that they have made on this kind of part. On it. It's on the web on the Washington Post where I put those out. So I voted against Souter. I wish I'd voted, he's the most significant and dramatic one. But that I certainly regret, and there are others probably as well. You don't really want to. I mean, I wish President Nixon was for pay or play. Years ago, some of the old guard will remember on the health care, when actually he was going to just about be impeached, and at that time, they sent a message on, which you're really interested in health insurance, we'll go for the pay or play part. You either provide the health insurance or you pay into a fund, is basically the concept, in order to get everybody covered. We said absolutely not. We're going to win the Congress. It's going to be veto-proof, and we're going to get the single payer and win that thing overwhelmingly. And we're still holding our breath till then.
Senator, just a couple of other questions, because I know we've got some people out there, especially the students, who are chomping at the bit to ask a question, but I do have just a couple of others. You have said, I think, that your proudest vote came in 2002, the vote you cast against authorizing the president to go to war in Iraq, talking about all the military. You were referring to the military, some of the military experts who said at the time they warned about what would happen. The question I have for you, though, is that a commentary on some of your colleagues who had the same information and still voted to give the president that authority? And I'm including Senator Hillary Clinton and Senator John Kerry.
Well, they all answer their own reasons for doing this. But let me just put this vote on that Iraq into some perspective. This was 5 weeks before an election. What had President Bush's father done going into Iraq? One. We were 5 weeks before the election, and he said, we're not going to take it now before the election because it'll be construed to be political. So we'll take it after the election. Hello? But no, they insisted. The Republicans absolutely insisted that we'd take it up before, and everyone knew what was going to happen. And they absolutely went out and beat the devil out of people who voted against that at that particular time. I think as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I was particularly advantaged. I mean, I listened to the panelists of all the combat arms. I mean, you had General Hoare, who's from Hyde Park, Massachusetts, distinguished Marine Commandant. He was highly decorated in Vietnam. Zinni, highly decorated in Vietnam Marine Commodore. General Nash, who ran the first Gulf War campaign. Every one of these battle-hardened combat arms all get it. I remember General Hoare, his last words were, and he testified, he said, I will tell you this, we go on in and invade Iraq, he said, Baghdad's going to look like the last 7 minutes of Private Ryan. That was his, and those words have just echoed in my mind ever since. How could he know that at that time? And they just knew about it at the time. Now I don't, other people had different reasons to vote for it. The other very interesting issue on the Armed Services Committee that was all classified at the time, and so is only the members of the Armed Services who don't. When Tenet came before the Armed Services Committee, remember the president went up to the United Nations and they were going to look out after the inspections. And so they asked Rumsfeld, and he said, where are the weapons of mass destruction? He said, they're north, south, east, and west of Baghdad. That was his answer. So then they asked Tenet to come up, and he said, well, we've got 106 sites. So Levin asked him, well, we've got 106 sites. Let's give the inspectors, give that list over. Oh, no, we can't do that. Why can't we? Can't give them because then they'll move them all. And we won't be able to get, well, let's have a small, all right, we'll have a small number. You couldn't get a list. Then they said that they gave 8 sites. Then they gave 15 sites. And they finally said they gave 40 sites. This is in the 2 weeks coming on up, still 0. Nothing that was finding out at the end of it. At the end of it, now you find out that they gave no sites to the inspector. Their testimony, Tenet's testimony, for the Armed Services Committee on this. So, you know, there's going to be a lot when historians look back on this. But I think as a member of the Armed Services Committee, particularly advantaged, tried to raise these in the debate. We had 8 votes on the Friday before. We voted on the Thursday, the following Thursday, but there were 8 votes against it. Over the weekend, more people thought about it. We talked to a lot of people about it. We're rushed in terms of getting on now, coming into the elections and all. I think we'd had perhaps more time. Maybe we had a different result. Probably not, but I think it's going to be an important lesson for history.
All right, Senator, we're going to go to the audience, and as we do, though, I want to ask you, who do you think is getting the best? We've had an unusual public fight this week between 2 famous families, I guess you'd say, President Bush and the Clintons, between what President Clinton said on Fox News Sunday last week about 9/11 and President Bush, Condoleezza Rice, Hillary Clinton back. Who is that about politics, Senator? Mainly about politics, and who's getting the better of it?
I kind of like President Clinton. I thought he, I think you get it sort of up to here once in a while. I mean, I'm sure he wished he expressed it a little different. Some of the words he used a little bit differently on that part, but do you
think he was intemperate?
Well, I think he would say he might have paused a little bit and thought about it a little bit, presented it might have differently, but I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I thought it was refreshing. And I thought that the facts that were brought up on that thing were particularly valuable, and then we've seen a lot of review about his representations, and they've held up pretty well. So I don't, I think probably the thing that Senator Clinton has to think about is that's going to be the buzz. She runs for president. That's going to be every day. Kind of battle she's going to be in. I think she's up to it, certainly myself, but it gives you a little preview of what you're probably going to expect in another election, presidential election, should she run.
Will you support her if she runs?
Well, I've got my own candidates around here. Should she get the Democratic nomination, I would certainly support her enthusiastically.
All right, I'm glad you clarified that. All right, questions, and I think we've got microphone. Here we go. Yes, this young woman.
Hello. I think that one of President...
Please give us your name first. And
my name is Pat Wright,
Great.
And I was an SAC member, graduated in '83. I think that one of President Kennedy's greatest achievement was the Peace Corps. Now we have a president that walks very loudly and carries a big stick. But my understanding is that when President Kennedy was in office, you had people in the caves of Tibet with this picture. In essence, he instilled a great deal of respect for the American presidency. How do we craft a politics wherein we get away from the notion that there is peace through an effectual strength and actually strength through peace?
Well, I probably ought to ask my nephew who just came back from the Peace Corps, who's sitting over there, give that answer, having served in the Peace Corps for a couple of years down in the Dominican Republic. I think I think first of all you have to have a person who put a very high priority, or leadership that puts a high priority in trying to find ways of bridging different cultures and different viewpoints and different traditions. One of the great lines President Kennedy had is making the world safe for diversity. You have to, I was always impressed, I'm always impressed, but particularly impressed that 5 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he made the speech, one of his best speeches at American University, challenged the Soviet Union for arms control. And this was just after you came out of one of the time of the most strident periods with the Soviet Union to try and sort of move this process. It has to start up at the top. But I think it's important for, this is the great kind of challenge of the generations. We have not had a single hearing in the United States Congress on the reasons for Al-Qaeda. What's the origins for the hostility, the suspicion, there hasn't been a single hearing. Can you imagine that? 4.5 years about what is it that is, we read books about it. We know about the pressures on the Western culture in terms of other problems that exist in the Middle East and all these other issues. But where are we trying to do a look in to begin to the further deepener and understanding? Where is that starting from? That has to start at the top. It starts with the President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the leaders on that. But I think the American people are out there and be enormously responsive.
Yes, and give us your name first.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Jenny Leland. I'm a senior at Newton South High School. I'll be interning in your Boston office this spring, and I hope to someday follow in your footsteps in the Senate.
Oh.
My question...
Not too soon, I hope.
My question for you tonight is, to what extent do you think the increased power of the media undermines the legitimacy of public officials and encourages a partisan divide based more on image than policy?
Well, I think the experts here with me, but I think one of the most interesting phenomenon, I think it's is the increasing access to information that people are getting that aren't coming directly from the formal media. I mean, if you look in those reviews that the Institute of Politics have had about how students were getting their information, and you saw a few years ago it was all going up to the nightly news, and the nightly news were all coming on down, and they were getting it on the internet, or getting it through Jon Stewart, or getting it through these other, getting it through other means, getting it direct, what you might say directly, getting it on the blogs, getting it through other kinds of, and I don't know quite how that. I know as a candidate, I'm spending a lot of attention on that. I talk with bloggers, frequently, call them, answer, do all of those kinds of parts. I think there's a whole new way of getting information out there. I'll give you an interesting example of this. When Wellstone ran, he couldn't raise any money at all. And he was coming on in towards the end, and we had a back and forth campaign in terms of the leadership. The last 5 weeks, money just shuffled into his place. He had $2.5 million left at the end after he was lost at that part in the last 5 days of it. They couldn't shuffle the money out. And it all came on in through these low donors that finally said this is something, this is a race, this war was important, this was an issue. He was a figure and came on in. That's a phenomenon out there. And I think candidates have to learn that there is a phenomenon out there and start going for those people rather than the fat cats, and maybe it'll change about, that'll be the hope. I didn't give you a direct answer, but I would say is the indirect part is becoming, I think, dramatically more important about the way people are getting news, and politicians ought to know about it.
All right, we have a question up
Yes.
here. Can you give us your name?
My name is Ben Bolger, and I'm a graduate student at Harvard. And certainly we're celebrating 40 years of inspiration from the Institute of Politics. I was wondering if you could look back on your own career and tell us some memories of how you were inspired during your university studies, and what it made, and when you became sincerely interested in politics as a result of your experiences in college.
Well, one of my great memories, and I think my friend John Culver and Milton would remember, I remember going to Sox Side 2 here, where we had Sam Beer, and it was the growth of Western political thought, from Bagehot to Charlemagne or something, and then it was Charlemagne to the Constitution. And we all looked through it on a freshman manual since Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11, and say, boy, that's our course. Option, Saturdays, option. Well, what a mistake that was. And we met over, I think, in Sanders Hall, and we were 1,000 students at the freshmen, and I must say there were 850 in there, and Sam Beer's still around, still well, and he was just an inspiring figure. I see John and I have lunch with him from time to time in Washington. I did at the time of the impeachment. I went and had lunch with him, and he talked all about common law and the history in England about impeachment, and he knew everything, where the concepts came in terms of Greece and Rome. It was just fascinating. Arthur Holcomb, I think much of it was here at Harvard. I had Arthur Holcomb, who had taught my 3 brothers and my father. I had him the last year, and he taught about the Constitutional Convention. You just sat in there and you just thought that you were sitting in the hall in Philadelphia with the Constitution. It just sort of awakened enormous interest sort of in constitutional issues. I think a lot with the, I can remember some other teachers that were more difficult that they're going to.
All right, Senator.
Thank you, but I think there's the opportunity here to get inspiring figures.
Oh. Yeah. Sorry, yes, up here.
My name is Noah Silver. I'm a freshman at the college. Thank you for your speech tonight, Senator. You mentioned human rights violations committed against detainees, or what the Patriot Act defines as terrorist aliens, by the current administration. What do you think of Senator McCain's plan to use the Army Field Manual for defining interrogation procedures and detainee rights?
Yeah. Well, I think it was excellent, and it was accepted 90-9. What we had prior to the time of the McCain amendment, what is called the Bybee Memorandum, for those that are ever interested, following the torture. And this had been developed by what they call the Office of Legal Counsel in the Judiciary. And that was going to be instructions to CIA and DOD of what were going to be the terms of torture. And you find out that they were getting the calls from the CIA, they got to make it tougher and tougher and tougher until finally the Bybee Memorandum came on out. And that was the defining criteria for which Guantanamo and Iraq took place. And this is the bottom line in the Bybee Memorandum, is that you can go out and torture with impunity, and as long as you don't have a specific intent to hurt the person and just gain the information, you are going to be free and clear under the President's executive power. That is a restatement of it. You can get it on the web on that. You look at this kind of part. And the reason that was repudiated is when Gonzales came up, Attorney General Gonzales came before the Judiciary, he never would have gotten out of the Judiciary Committee. He still had 42 or 44 votes against him because of his intercession with the OL, with Bybee. You know where Bybee is today? Ninth Circuit. You know why he is in there? Because the Justice Department wouldn't give us any of the information or any of the memoranda that he wrote. Can you imagine that? They refused to give us any of the information. He went on and he whistled through the United States Senate and sitting on the Ninth Circuit in California. That, you talk about what I was reading tonight about the failure of being able to respond and to deal with the information and the exchange of information, responding to Congress on this. But this was the point. Gonzales then ended that part, and then McCain came up and had said that these are particular kinds of crimes that they're offensive. There are 8 of them. Yesterday in the United States Senate, I offered an amendment that said, okay, on the tribunals, we are going to take these 7 offenses. This is waterboarding, electric shocks, dogs going through the standing naked, hypothermia, a series of activities. And I said, look, we're going to amend to say that if any foreign country that has supported the Geneva Conventions commits any of these activities, we will say it is a war crime. Because you have the CIA is not covered under the Army manuals. You could have SEALs, if they're not in uniform, wouldn't be covered. You can have newspaper people that will be picked up and said, you're a spy, and they'll torture you. You can get civilians traveling, Americans just traveling in countries can be subject. So this amendment said, we'll take what's in the Army manual, what we all agree. And then, you know what, I read the trials that we had after World War II, where the Japanese had used this activity, and what we did to them. If they waterboarded, they got 18 years. If they used electric shocks, some were executed.
And I said, this was the finding of the United States. This is where we were. This is where we were at the end of World War II. Now we're refusing. On the floor of the Senate, we lost that 46-51. 46, all my colleagues voted with us, plus Chafee and Sununu voted with us, but that was defeated. We're not even prepared to say that if somebody else, any other country, picks up an American and gives them the waterboarding, but we're going to say that we view that your activity is a war crime. That is, I think, unfortunate. But it's John McCain says that what we passed yesterday still protects his memoranda. I like John, and I work with him closely, and I respect him, but I don't believe it does.
Yes. Give us your name.
I'm Rachel Esplin. I'm a freshman at the college. As a preface, I'd like to commend you for your courage in voting against the war in Iraq originally in 2002. However, in light of the current devolution towards civil war and other complications in Iraq, I'm just wondering what specific actions you believe should be taken in that country.
Well, we are trying to, first of all, the most recent thing is to get another NIE report from the National Intelligence Estimate on Iraq. We haven't had one for 2 years. I got that as an amendment to the defense appropriations that are passing right now in the United States Senate while we're here, to ensure the one that you read about all last week was an assessment of global terrorism. We haven't had it for 2 years. What we can try and do is to bring information to the public in terms of the Iraq conflict, and continue to speak out as a member of the Senate and try to educate people about that, and to get support for people that will look at it in a way that I view it. My own sense about it is that this thing has almost moved, I don't know how many of you saw that report about Anbar province, when the Marines were coming out of there, announced that they were going to come out of that, going to relocate and try and do more about Baghdad. They have 32 tribal chiefs, and 27 of them got together and said, now that the Marines are leaving, let's get rid of the Al-Qaeda. This is the kind of thing I think we, as a permanent feature in that, understanding what this president has said, is that this is going to be decided by the next administration. You're getting no political dialogue. You're getting no political discussion. You're not going to get any place at all. I think you'd have a difficult time now. I think I'm for as rapid as you can, but I think you're going to have some presence there for at least for a temporary period of time, which I'm not sure you needed probably a year and a half ago. So we're working and trying to do the best we can to see that we're going to elect congressmen and senators that are going to be willing to stand up more on it. I offered the Demoulin Amendment that ended the war, the Contra War in Central America. It took 5 years to get that. It took 5 years. You look at the anti-war movement here in the United States, was basically 67. I mean, really good. I ran against Stuart Hughes, who was a peace candidate in 62, if you could believe it. He was against that before everybody really knew where Vietnam. But it was 67, and it never ended until 73. This is a tragic circumstances, but we've been through it. It took us 5 years to end the Contra War, and it took us 7 or 8 years, tragically, to end we had lost half of the boys and women that we lost in Vietnam were lost after 1968 when the country was all up in arms. So this is a slow-moving process, I can tell you, and I appreciate your frustration and that we're not doing more about it.
Senator, as usual, the students have all the best questions, and I've just been given a signal we have time for only one more, so you are it. Give us your name.
It's quite a burden. I'm Edward Demoulin. I'm a student at the college, and I was a congressional page 2 years ago.
Where are you from?
I'm from Illinois, from Southern Illinois. During my time in the House, actually, there was legitimate discussion in the Senate about the majority's ability to stop the minority from making filibusters. And I just wanted to see if you thought if the Republicans who voted for the compromise were making an effort to gain political support from their constituents, or if you thought there were people who were truly interested in preserving the traditions of the Senate.
Is this on the compromise? Is this which is this on the judges, or which compromise in the Senate? Is this the judge, the nuclear option?
Yeah.
That is the question about whether we were going to face a majority that was going to effectively strip the Judiciary Committee from being being able to consider the nominees on it. I think there were people that wanted to keep the institution, working. I'll tell you what was the resonance. Many of those that were opposed to the compromise saw that we took at least some judges after that they took strong difference with. But I think for many of us, the issue was the Supreme Court coming up. And we wanted to try and make sure that we were going to have at least an institutional framework. We did as much as you might have wanted to oppose a lot of other people and try and stop them. You wanted to make sure for the Supreme Court we were going to have a framework. The Senate was going to try and be the Senate to try and consider the nominees. I think that was a spirit which was kind of a bipartisan and was overriding an arching spirit, and I think that was healthy myself. I think that was I think that they made the right judgment and they made the right decision.
Senator, as I thank you, I want to ask you finally, who do you think is going to be the longest serving senator in the history of the United States Senate? Is it going to be Robert Byrd, or is it going to be Edward Kennedy?
Well, Byrd's, he's running this time. He's running this time too. And you talk about members of the Senate and the differences that you have. Bob Byrd said, Ted, I didn't like you when you came to the Senate, and I didn't care if anybody knew it. And he said, quite frankly, you didn't like me, and you didn't care if anybody knew it. So that's a very nice way to start a conversation. And now, after his effort on the Iraqi war, we're best of friends. And he's up, and I intend to stay in the Senate until I sort of get the hang of it. I thought, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.